The rain in New York City didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, reflecting the neon lights of establishments that thrived in the dark. Alessandro Vanne sat in the shadowed corner of the Onyx Room, a private lounge in Tribeca that served as neutral ground for the city's power brokers. He was 45 years old, wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, yet he looked like a man carrying the weight of a collapsed building on his shoulders. The crystal tumbler of aged scotch in his hand was untouched, his gaze fixed on the condensation sliding down the glass, ignoring the murmurs of politicians and captains who sought his favor. He was the undisputed king of the eastern seaboard's underworld, a man who had survived wars, indictments, and betrayal, but the victory tasted like ash. Survival had become a tedious chore, a repetitive loop of paranoia and violence that had long ago lost its adrenaline. The heavy oak doors of the lounge swung open, cutting through the haze of cigar smoke and low jazz, admitting a gust of cold, wet air and a woman who seemed to carry the storm inside her. Elena Russo didn't walk. She stalked, her movements sharp and deliberate, clad in a dress the color of dried blood that clung to a frame too thin to be healthy, but too wired to be weak. Her hair was dark and wet from the rain, plastered against a pale face dominated by eyes that held no fear, only a terrifying hollow focus. The room went quiet, not out of respect, but out of the primal instinct that recognizes a predator, or perhaps a bomb waiting to detonate. She wasn't a wife, a mistress, or a daughter of the families. She was an anomaly, a ghost from a lower stratum of the criminal world that usually didn't make it past the velvet ropes. Alessandro watched her scan the room, dismissing the lesser men with a glance until her eyes locked onto his. He felt a strange, cold thrill run down his spine, the first genuine emotion he had felt in months. Security guards stepped forward, massive men with earpieces and concealed weapons, their hands raising to intercept her. But Alessandro lifted a single finger, freezing them in place. He wanted to see what this aberration would do. Elena walked straight to his table, ignoring the empty chair, and stood over him, smelling of rain, cheap cigarettes, and expensive gunpowder. Up close, he could see the fine tremors in her hands and the jagged scar running along her collarbone, a testament to a life that had tried and failed to kill her. "They say you're the only man in this city who can kill a ghost," she said, her voice raspy, lacking the polished cadence of the social climbers who usually approached him. She didn't wait for an invitation to speak. She simply threw the words onto the table like a gauntlet. Alessandro looked up at her, seeing the desperation masked by fury, recognizing the look of someone who had run out of options and was now running on pure hate. "I have a name," she continued, "and I need resources. I don't have money, and I don't have influence. All I have is the guarantee that if you help me, the fallout will be spectacular." It was a bizarre pitch, devoid of seduction or subservience, and it intrigued him more than any briefcase full of cash ever could. "You're Elena Russo," Alessandro said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the table. He knew everything that happened in his city. He knew her father had been a small-time bookie executed by a rival faction, and that she had disappeared for 5 years, rumored to be dead or worse. "I know who you are. I know you're radioactive. My consigliere has a file on you that suggests you're unstable, reckless, and likely to get anyone standing next to you indicted or buried." He took a slow sip of his scotch, watching her reaction. She didn't flinch. She leaned in closer, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white, her eyes burning with a manic intensity that bordered on madness. "I'm not looking for a partner, Mr. Vane. I'm looking for a weapon," she hissed, the veneer of politeness vanishing entirely. "The man I want is Senator Corcoran. He's the one who signed off on the zoning permits that let the Albanians pave over my father's grave to build a warehouse. He's protected by your rivals. You can't touch him politically, but I can touch him physically. I can get close. I just need access." It was a suicide mission. Corcoran was a made man in the political sphere, untouchable, guarded by layers of bureaucracy and muscle. To go after him was to declare war on the city's infrastructure itself. Any rational boss would have had her dragged out into the alley and shot for even suggesting it. Alessandro swirled the ice in his glass, the sound clinking sharply in the tense silence of the lounge. He looked at his own reflection in the amber liquid, a tired man, a bored king sitting on a throne of corpses. He thought about the endless meetings scheduled for tomorrow, the disputes over union contracts, the money laundering schemes that needed approval. It was also incredibly dull. Then he looked at Elena, a creature of pure chaos, vibrating with a deadly purpose that he envied. She offered him nothing but trouble. She offered him a way to burn down the monotony. He saw the warning signs flashing like neon lights in his mind, screaming that she was a catastrophe waiting to happen. "You know what happens to women like you in this world?" Alessandro asked softly, not as a threat, but as a genuine inquiry. "You burn bright, you make a mess, and then you disappear into the Hudson. You are asking me to fund a kamikaze mission." Elena's expression shifted, a twisted smile appearing that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile of someone who had already accepted their fate and was merely negotiating the terms of their execution. She reached into her clutch, not for a gun, but for a lighter, flicking it open and watching the flame dance. "I'm not a woman you keep, Alessandro," she warned, dropping the honorifics, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "I destroy men. I take their order, their structure, and I shred it because that's the only way to get what I want. If you let me in, I will wreck this little empire you're so bored with. I will drag you into the mud with me." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a decade. She wasn't promising pleasure or loyalty. She was promising mutual destruction. She was warning him that she was a disease. Alessandro felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, a sensation so foreign it felt like cracking dry clay. He looked at his security detail, who were tense, waiting for the order to remove her. Then he looked back at Elena, seeing the fire in her hand and the fire in her soul. He realized suddenly that he didn't care about the consequences. He didn't care about the senator, the truce, or the profits. He just wanted to feel something real, even if that something was the heat of the flames. He wanted the end to come, and she looked like the perfect herald for it. "You destroy men?" Alessandro repeated, placing his glass down with a decisive thud. He stood up, towering over her, buttoning his jacket with a calm that terrified the onlookers. He signaled the waiter to bring the check, signaling the end of the night and the beginning of something far darker. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, smelling the rain and the danger. "Good," he whispered, the truth of it settling in his chest like a heavy stone. "I'm tired of surviving anyway." He offered her his arm, a gentlemanly gesture in the face of impending doom. Elena stared at it for a second, surprised by his acceptance, before looping her scarred arm through his. As they walked out of the Onyx room together, leaving the safety of the neutral ground, the silence behind them was deafening. Every other criminal in the room knew what they had just witnessed. It wasn't the start of a romance, it was the start of a war. Alessandro Vanni had just invited the apocalypse into his car, and for the first time in years he was looking forward to the ride. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was a fortress of glass and steel, a cold monument to Alessandro's success. But with Elena's arrival, the atmosphere shifted from sterile to volatile. It had been 2 weeks since that night at the lounge, and she had moved through his life like a hurricane, upending the meticulous order he maintained. Documents were scattered across the mahogany dining table, mixed with maps of the city and photos of Senator Corcoran's security detail. The air, usually filtered and scentless, now hung heavy with cigarette smoke and the metallic tang of gun oil as Elena disassembled and reassembled a pistol on his Italian leather sofa. Alessandro stood by the window, watching the city lights, listening to the rhythmic click-clack of the weapon, a sound that had become the heartbeat of his home. His capo, Marcus, stood by the door, his face a mask of restrained fury. Marcus had been with Alessandro since the days of running numbers in Brooklyn, and he viewed Elena as a parasite eating away at the organization's brain. "You're skipping the sit-down with the triads, Al," Marcus said, his voice tight. "For the second time, they're taking it as an insult. And for what? So you can help her plan a hit on a sitting politician? This is insanity. The families will vote to isolate us. We'll be fighting a war on 3 fronts. Marcus glared at Elena, who didn't even look up from her weapon, her focus absolute, dismissing the second-in-command as if he were furniture. "Let them be insulted," Alessandro replied, turning away from the window. His eyes were shadowed, dark circles forming from lack of sleep, but there was a manic energy in his movements that Marcus hadn't seen since they were young street soldiers. "The triads are business. This is personal." He walked over to the table, tracing the route Elena had marked in red ink. It was a gala at the Metropolitan Museum, a high-security event where Corcoran would be vulnerable for exactly 4 minutes during a transition between the main hall and the VIP terrace. It was a logistical nightmare, a suicide run, but Alessandro found himself captivated by the sheer audacity of it. "It's not personal to us, Al," Marcus snapped, stepping forward. "She's using you. Look at her. She doesn't give a damn if you lose the territory or if we all go to prison. She just wants her pound of flesh." Eleanor finally looked up, her eyes cold and dead. "And he wants to feel alive," she said, cutting through the tension. "You can keep your territory, Marcus. I'm giving him a reason to wake up." It was a cruel, manipulative thing to say, but it struck the core of the truth so precisely that Alessandro laughed, a dry, barking sound. Marcus looked between them, realizing with horror that his boss was fully aware he was being used and simply didn't care. Later that night, the tension in the penthouse shifted from professional to something more visceral. Eleanor was pacing, her anxiety spiking as the date of the gala approached. She was a raw nerve, unable to sit still, fueled by caffeine and hatred. Alessandro watched her, feeling a strange mix of pity and desire. It wasn't a romantic desire. There was no tenderness in it. It was the desire to touch the fire, to see if he could handle the burn. When he grabbed her arm to stop her pacing, she spun around, her body tense, ready to fight. For a moment, they just stood there, 2 broken people in a multi-million-dollar cage. "You know this ends with us dead," she said, her voice shaking slightly. It was the first time she had acknowledged his mortality, if not her own. "Even if we get Corcoran, the commission won't let a boss who kills a senator live. You're throwing away a kingdom for a girl who won't even say thank you." She was trying to push him away, testing the limits of his nihilism. She needed to know if he was truly committed to the fall, or if he would pull the ripcord at the last second. Alessandro pulled her closer, the gap between them closing until he could feel the heat radiating off her skin. "I never asked for a thank you," Alessandro murmured, his hand moving to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her dark hair. "I built this kingdom, Eleanor, brick by brick, and now I realize it's just a prison with better room service. You're not the executioner, you're the key." He kissed her then, and it wasn't soft. It was a collision, violent and desperate, a clash of teeth and breath. It was the intimacy of 2 people jumping off a bridge together, holding hands, not for comfort, but to ensure neither one survived the impact. The next few days blurred into a haze of preparation and internal conflict. Alessandro began liquidating assets, moving money into offshore accounts, not for himself, but to create chaos, to ensure that when he fell, the vacuum would be absolute. He stopped answering calls from the other families. He ignored the summons from the commission. He was systematically cutting the strings that held him to the world of order. Elena watched him do it with a mix of awe and guilt. She had warned him she destroyed men, but watching Alessandro dismantle his life with such precision was terrifying. She realized he was more broken than she was. She was driven by revenge, but he was driven by nothingness. On the eve of the gala, the atmosphere in the city felt heavy, pressing down on them. They drove to a secluded spot under the Brooklyn Bridge, the rain drumming relentlessly on the roof of the armored SUV. They watched the skyline, the city that Alessandro had ruled for a decade. "Why?" Elena asked quietly, the engine idling. "You could have just killed me that first night. You could have walked away." She needed to understand why a king would choose to become a pauper, why a survivor would choose death. "Because I looked at you," Alessandro said, staring at the grey water of the East River, "and I saw the only honest thing in this city. Everyone else wants power, money, respect. You just want blood. It's pure. And I want to be part of something pure before I go." He turned to her, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. "Tomorrow, we cross the line. Once we step into that museum, there's no coming back. Marcus is gone. The crew is gone. It's just us." Elena looked at him, and for a fleeting second, the hardness in her eyes cracked. She reached out, touching his face with a trembling hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. It was an apology for what she was about to do, for the ruin she had brought to his doorstep. But Alessandro just smiled, that sad, tired smile. "Don't be," he replied. "I told you. I was tired of surviving." He put the car in gear, driving them back toward the city that was waiting to eat them alive. The conflict was no longer about whether they would do it. It was about how much of the world they could take with them when they went. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a cathedral of culture, tonight transformed into a fortress of wealth and hypocrisy. The gala was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, the air filled with the clinking of champagne flutes and polite, meaningless laughter. Alessandro moved through the crowd with the ease of a shark in a koi pond, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, concealing the Kevlar vest beneath. Elena was on his arm, unrecognizable in a shimmering silver gown that covered her scars. Her hair swept up, diamonds at her throat that cost more than the senator's entire campaign. But beneath the glamour, her body was rigid, her eyes scanning every face, every exit, every security guard. The plan was in motion, and the tension was a physical weight pressing against their chests. Senator Corcoran was holding court near the Temple of Denda, surrounded by donors and sycophants. He was a large man with a flushed face and a laugh that boomed too loud, confident in his untouchability. Alessandro felt a surge of revulsion. This was the man Elena was willing to burn the world for, a corrupt bureaucrat who traded lives for zoning permits. It seemed so small, so petty, yet looking at Elena, he saw the child she had been, the daughter grieving a father buried under concrete. The motive didn't matter anymore, only the act. He squeezed her hand, a signal. Wait. The signal to move came not from a clock, but from the shift in the room's energy as the speeches began. The lights dimmed, focusing on the podium. This was the window. Alessandro created a diversion, signaling a waiter he had bribed to drop a tray of glasses near the security detail. The crash was sharp, drawing eyes and bodies. In that split second of confusion, Alessandro and Elena slipped away from the main crowd, moving toward the VIP terrace, where Corcoran was heading for a smoke. The silence of the corridor was deafening compared to the roar of the party behind them. Alessandro pulled his suppressed pistol from his waistband, checking the chamber. Elena did the same, her hand steady now that the moment was here. They burst onto the terrace. The rain was lashing down outside, the wind howling, creating a chaotic backdrop for the confrontation. Corcoran was there, alone with one bodyguard. Alessandro dropped the bodyguard with 2 precise shots to the chest before the man could reach for his radio. The muffled thwip-thwip sounds were swallowed by the storm. Corcoran spun around, his cigar falling from his mouth, his eyes widening in recognition and terror. "Vane," he stammered, backing up against the stone railing. "What are you doing? Do you know who I am? The Commission?" "The commission isn't here," Alessandro said calmly, holstering his weapon and stepping aside. "She is." He gestured to Elena. She stepped forward, the silver dress soaked instantly by the rain blowing onto the terrace, transforming her into a vengeful spirit. She didn't scream, she didn't monologue. She simply walked toward the man who had erased her family. Corcoran looked at her, confusion mixing with fear. He didn't even remember her father. That was the insult that cut deepest. To him it was just business, to her it was everything. "Please," Corcoran begged, holding up his hands, the diamonds on his cufflinks catching the light. "I can pay you. Whatever he's paying you, I'll double it. I can get you immunity." Elena raised her gun, aiming point blank at his face. Her hand shook, not from fear, but from the overwhelming release of a decade of hatred. Alessandro watched, waiting for the shot, waiting for the end. But then the doors to the terrace burst open. Not security, not police. It was a hit squad from a rival family tipped off by someone. Maybe Marcus, maybe the Triads. They had used the gala as a trap for Alessandro. Chaos erupted. Automatic gunfire shredded the glass doors, sending shards flying like deadly confetti. Alessandro tackled Elena, throwing them both behind a stone planter as bullets chewed up the terrace. Corcoran wasn't so lucky. In the crossfire, the senator was hit, not by Elena, but by a stray spray of bullets from the assassins. He slumped to the ground, dead before he hit the wet stone. Elena screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish. Her kill had been stolen. Her closure had been ripped away by the random violence of the world Alessandro inhabited. "We have to move!" Alessandro roared, dragging her up. She fought him, trying to crawl toward Corcoran's body, to shoot him again, to make it hers. "He's dead! Elena, it's over!" Alessandro shook her, his grip bruising. The assassins were advancing, their tactical boots crunching on the glass. Alessandro returned fire, his movements mechanical, precise. He killed one, then another, buying them seconds. He wasn't fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting to get this broken woman out of the kill box. They scrambled over the side of the terrace, dropping onto a lower scaffolding used for renovations. The fall was brutal. Alessandro felt a rib crack as he landed, the pain sharp and blinding. He grabbed Elena, who was sobbing dry, heaving breaths, her eyes fixed on the balcony above where her target lay dead by another man's hand. "You promised me," she hissed at Alessandro, striking his chest with her fist. "You promised I would do it." "I promised you chaos," Alessandro gritted out, dragging her through the scaffolding maze as sirens began to wail in the distance. "And this is it." The reality of the break had hit. The senator was dead. The rival families had openly attacked a boss at a public event. The police were swarming. There was no going back to the penthouse, no going back to the life of suits and scotch. They were rats now, scurrying in the dark. Alessandro looked at Elena, seeing the total collapse of her purpose. She hadn't found release, she had found only more trauma. And he, in his attempt to save her or damn himself, had ensured that their end would be messy, painful, and imminent. The safe house was a rot-infested apartment in the South Bronx, a place Alessandro had kept off the books for 20 years, intending never to use it. It smelled of mold, stale dust, and the metallic scent of Alessandro's own blood. He sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, shirtless, gritting his teeth as he stitched the graze wound on his side with a needle and thread from a travel kit. There was no doctor coming, no cleaners. The network was dark. His phone lay on the floor, battery removed, a dead brick. The TV in the corner, volume turned low, broadcast the news. Senator Corcoran assassinated. Gang war erupts in Manhattan. Manhunt for Alessandro Vane. Elena sat by the window, peering through the cracks in the boarded-up glass. She hadn't spoken in 6 hours. She was still wearing the ruined silver gown, now stained with grease and mud, looking like a dethroned queen of a garbage heap. The manic energy was gone, replaced by a terrifying, catatonic stillness. The theft of her revenge had broken something fundamental in her. She had lived for that one moment, and the universe, in its cruel irony, had denied her the trigger pull. She turned slowly to look at Alessandro, her eyes empty. "It didn't count," she whispered. "He didn't know why he died. He just died scared. It wasn't justice." "There is no justice, Elena," Alessandro said, snapping the thread with his teeth. He stood up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "There's just things happening. Order and disorder. We cause disorder. That has to be enough." He walked over to the kitchenette, pouring tap water into a dirty mug. He was stripped of his power, his wealth, his reputation. He was a fugitive, with a bounty on his head that would make his own mother turn him in. And strangely, he felt lighter. The exhaustion of maintaining the facade was gone. He was just a man trying to survive the next hour. "You lost everything because of me," Elena said, her voice flat. It wasn't an apology anymore. It was a statement of fact. She looked around the squalid room, contrasting it with the penthouse they had left. "Why aren't you angry? You should be beating me. You should be throwing me to the wolves to buy your way back in." This was her worldview. Transactional, violent, punitive. She couldn't comprehend his resignation. Alessandro walked over to her, crouching down so he was at eye level. "I told you I was tired. That life, it was suffocating. This," he gestured to the room, to the sirens wailing in the distance. "This is real. The fear is real. The pain is real. I'd rather bleed in a gutter knowing I chose it than die of boredom in a silk suit." He reached out to touch her hand, but she flinched. The connection between them was fraying. The shared goal was gone, and now they were just two damaged people trapped in a box. The consequences outside were escalating. The news reported that the FBI had raided Alessandro's known operations. His assets were frozen, but worse, the word on the street, which Alessandro knew by instinct, was that the other families were purging his loyalists. Marcus was likely dead. His drivers, his accountants, his soldiers, all being erased because of his decision to indulge a vendetta that wasn't his. The guilt hit him then, a heavy, nauseating wave. He had traded hundreds of lives for his own existential thrill ride. He looked at Elena and wondered if she was worth the mountain of skulls he had just piled up. "We can't stay here," Elena said suddenly, standing up. "They'll check the old safe houses. The Russians know about this place. My father did business with them here in the 90s. She was right. Her survival instinct was kicking back in, overriding the despair. "We need to move. Jersey. I know a guy at the docks who owes me a favor. He can get us on a container ship." It was a pipe dream. There were no favors left, but Alessandro nodded. He needed her to have a goal, or she would shatter completely. They left the apartment under the cover of darkness, stealing a nondescript sedan parked on the street. The drive to the Jersey docks was a gauntlet of paranoia. Every police cruiser, every black SUV looked like the end. The radio crackled with reports of violence spilling into the boroughs. Alessandro drove with white-knuckled focus, while Elena watched the rearview mirror, clutching her pistol. The silence between them was heavy with the things they couldn't say. They weren't lovers. They were accomplices in a disaster. When they reached the industrial wasteland of the docks, the reality of their isolation set in. The contact Elena mentioned wasn't there. The warehouse was empty, save for rats and rusted machinery. They stood in the vast, echoing space, the wind whistling through broken windows. "He's not coming," Elena said, her voice small. She slumped against a crate, sliding down to the floor. "Nobody is coming." Alessandro looked at her, then at the city skyline across the water. It was burning, literally. Smoke rose from two different points in the city, likely his warehouses being torched. He had destroyed his legacy. He looked at Elena, shivering in her ruined dress. He realized then that she had been right from the start. She did destroy men. But he had let her. He had handed her the hammer. "It's okay," he said, sitting beside her, the cold concrete seeping into his bones. "We don't need a ship." He checked his gun. 3 magazines left. We just need to choose how we finish this. The end didn't come with a bang, but with the slow, crushing grind of inevitability. They had holed up in the foreman's office of the abandoned warehouse, watching the sun rise over a grey industrial hellscape. The police scanners Alessandro had stolen from the car were buzzing with activity. They had been spotted entering the port. It wasn't just the police. The intercepted radio chatter confirmed that the rival syndicate's hit squad was also closing in. The authorities wanted them in cuffs. The Mafia wanted them in body bags. The race was on to see who would claim the prize. Elena was calm now. The hysteria of the failed hit and the panic of the flight had distilled into a cold acceptance. She used a bucket of water to wash the grime off her face, trying to regain some dignity. She looked at Alessandro, who was cleaning his gun for the 10th time. "You were a king," she said softly, "and I turned you into this." She gestured to the dusty office. "Do you hate me?" Alessandro looked up, his eyes weary but clear. "I hate that I waited this long to feel something," he replied. "You didn't do this to me, Elena. You just opened the door. I walked through it." He stood up and walked to the window. Black SUVs were pulling up at the main gate, flanking police cruisers. A standoff was brewing between the law and the lawless, all for the sake of the 2 people in the tower. "They're here," he announced simply. Elena joined him at the window. "I don't want to go to prison, Al," she said, "and I don't want them to torture me." She looked at her gun, then at him. "I want to go out on my feet." Alessandro nodded. He understood. There was no version of this story where they sipped cocktails on a beach in Mexico. That was a movie. This was reality. In reality, the bill always comes due. "We go out the front," Alessandro said. "We make them work for it." He handed her an extra magazine. "Stay behind me. We push for the water. If we make the edge, maybe we have a chance." It was a lie, and they both knew it. There was no chance. But it gave them a direction. It gave them a final act to play. They walked down the metal stairs, the sound of their footsteps echoing like a drumbeat. As they stepped out onto the main floor of the warehouse, the doors were kicked in. Light flooded the dark space. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" a voice boomed from a megaphone. Simultaneously, glass shattered from the upper skylights as the syndicate's shooters rappelled in, ignoring the police, intent on the contract. The warehouse erupted into a 3-way firefight. Alessandro moved with a fluidity that belied his age, firing, moving, covering Elena. He took a bullet to the shoulder, the impact spinning him around, but he stayed upright. He saw Elena firing back, her face a mask of fierce concentration. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the warrior she had wanted to be. They cut through the crossfire, dropping bodies, moving toward the rear exit. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of screams and explosions. They burst out the back doors onto the loading dock, the grey river churning below. But they were trapped. A police helicopter hovered above, the downdraft whipping the water into a frenzy. A sniper rifle trained on them. Behind them, the syndicate enforcers were breaching the door. Alessandro looked at the water, then at the approaching gunman, then at Elena. She was bleeding from a wound in her abdomen, holding her side, her face pale. She smiled at him, a real smile this time, sad and beautiful. "It's time," she said. She raised her gun, not at the police, but towards the syndicate men rushing the door, firing until the slide locked back. Empty. Alessandro fired his last rounds, dropping the lead pursuer. Silence fell for a microsecond as the enemies regrouped. They were cornered at the edge of the dock, the drop to the water 50 feet down, the enemy closing in. "I'm not going back in a cage," Alessandro said. He holstered his empty gun. He grabbed Elena's hand. Her grip was weak, but she held on. The helicopter pilot was shouting orders over the loudspeaker, but the sound was just white noise. Alessandro looked at the woman who had destroyed him, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had saved him from a slow death of the soul by giving him a quick death of the body. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she whispered. They didn't jump. That would have been poetic. In reality, the syndicate gunmen opened fire before they could move. Alessandro threw his body in front of Elena, taking the brunt of the volley. He collapsed, dragging her down with him. As he lay on the wet concrete, his vision fading, he saw the police swarming the gunmen. He felt Elena's hand in his, growing cold. She was looking at the sky, her eyes fixed on something he couldn't see. "Did we burn?" she murmured, her voice barely a breath. Alessandro coughed, tasting copper. "Yeah," he rasped, the darkness closing in. "We burned everything." He closed his eyes. The sirens sounded like a lullaby. The King of New York died on a dirty dock in Jersey, holding the hand of the woman who killed him, and for the first time in his life, he was at peace.